This webinar is going to focus on the design of cash transfer, with the objective being to share on the gaps identified at this design phase. We're not going to talk about the outcomes, but the design of programs, and also share experiences and lessons learned during the design of programs at the operational level through case and an experience of coordination of problems. Now, for these, you now have access to the chatbot, you have access to the Q&A. So throughout the webinar, you can ask your questions, we'll answer them. We may not have time to answer all the questions, but we're going to compile all the questions and try to prepare answers. Have French and English interpretation, depending on the channels you choose. The format is recorded, so you can be able to listen to the recordings later. Now back to the agenda. Just as a way of introduction, we're going to take stock on the use of cash transfer for nutrition, with the identification of gaps in the design phase. Then we're going to hear 3 case studies, one on cash transfer in Togo, one in Niger, and another version of WFP in Burkina, Mali, Niger. And we'll continue with the discussion panel, particularly with experts from WFP and USAID. And then we'll have the example of coordination in Nigeria with the cash transfer workshop, cash transfer nutrition workshop. I'll ask the panelists please to keep within the time because we don't have much time, and also not to go fast while speaking, so that the interpreters can follow. Can we quickly introduce ourselves? So we're going to introduce the various panelists. I'm going to give the floor to Anne-Sophie. Morning, everyone. I'm Anne-Sophie Demarie, technical team and nutrition and health. Seydou. Good morning. I'm Seidi Magashi, the regional office of WFP as nutritionist and monitoring and evaluation for the region. Thank you, Marina. Morning, everyone. I'm Marina Trepaldi, advisor, cash transfer and vouchers, focal point for Save the Children on the use of cash transfer in nutrition. Thank you. Ahmed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmed Dahir. I'm the Nutrition Sector Coordinator, Nigeria.
Secteur Nutrition, Nigeria. Thank you, Ahmed. Tian. Good morning. I'm Tian Moyer, Francophone nutrition reference person based in France. Maggie? Not ready. You see Maggie Holmes-Sharon, conseillère nutrition avec USAID. Dans le cadre de l'assistance humanitaire, je couvre le Nigeria. Merci beaucoup. Myself, working at the regional office of UNICEF as nutrition specialist, still on the early measurement treatment. Without much delay, we continue with the first presentation. Thank you, Justine. I want to take you through a very brief presentation of the feedback from the assessment or the evaluation that is done on the use of cash transfers for emergent nutrition in emergency situations. That's evaluation done by the Global Technical Group on cash for nutrition, and focus and took a few months and went through the review of the document, interviews with about 75 people to better understand what were the challenges, the technical operational challenges in the use of cash transfers for nutrition. We've had the findings of the evaluation a few days ago or a few weeks, Now we are going to make a quick presentation of the results, not all the results, but to highlight what is important of importance for this webinar. For that study, we went through the project cycle, including the needs assessment to understand how cash transfers to contribute to the nutrition outcomes, and understand the feasibility of using cash transfer for nutrition, identifying a response therefore, including strategic planning, that means designing a response, raising resources, implementing, evaluating, and considering cross-cutting issues. We are going to focus today on the initial steps, which are the needs assessment, the strategic planning, and implementation. Next, very quickly, when we reviewed the projects, reviewed a number of them, we were able to categorize them depending on whether they were focused on prevention or treatment. Well, treatment can be increasing, improving access to healthcare delivery, but also avoiding relapses, ensuring that the malnourished child once does not relapse. We also looked at the role of cash transfer in terms of access to balanced diet, the use of cash, multi-purpose cash. Won't be able to select some words in French because we're using English acronyms. This shows the types of approaches we've looked at. For each of the approaches, we're using cash transfer plus communications for behavior change. Without much surprise, out of 114 projects, majority are focusing on improving access to diversified diets, and then followed by improved access to treatment, access to healthcare, and that will depend on the various projects indeed. So we have the rest of the responses with the use of cash transfers for the improvement of food security and food diversification. All in a nutshell, what are the operational challenges highlighted by nutrition actors? Make a review study like a research project, but we were just considering the feelings of people in the field, those who are using cash transfer in order to obtain nutrition results. The first thing highlighted was the complexity of the analysis, the information to analyze, in addition to related to use of cash transfers like markets. It was important to understand the causes of malnutrition, functionality of healthcare services in order to identify economic barriers and other obstacles like structural barriers like non-operational health care centers and behavior change. We also had the inadequacy in resources, tools, and capacities. This was also highlighted. We have a lot of tools for market surveys, for cash transfers, but knowing how to evaluate the economic issues of malnutrition and how to design the projects, well, these types of tools are not yet available or not properly used or not properly known, particularly in emergency situations. There were many questions on targeting. Shall we consider a single targeting, meaning identifying the person, giving cash and saying, well, goodbye, or shall we make permanent targeting where beneficiaries are admitted gradually? Well, there was the question on how to use the nutritional status of vulnerability factor with our associated risks. During the response, the value of the appropriate transfer. We will talk about that in the studies, case studies that were part of the Nigeria webinar. Marina will tell us how to calculate, how to adapt those tools to really know how to calculate the amount to pay. There's also problems of consistency of tools and how, how to use multi-purpose cache will sometimes used for part of the issues, not all the issues that were identified. So gaps were actually identified in the calculation of the amount. There's also the fact that it's used to have combine uh, combine forecast. They help access to capital. So in this case, additional perhaps integration of community. That is done. However, as you all know, particularly those who are in attendance and have some nutrition background, they know that this takes time and resources. There may be limited impacts in emergency situations due to lack of time and resources to achieve that. So these were the highlights during the evaluation for the design and implementation of the response. Once again, we're not presenting everything due to limited time. Go back to Justin for the rest. Thank you so much, John. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. We're going straight to the case studies. Want to make an introduction of the case study. Want to make an introduction of the case studies. Well, I asked to share on the articulation of the case studies that have been chosen for today, with focused on the analysis and design of cash transfer for prevention and treatment of treatment of malnutrition. We have a case of Togo that has a project-based approach. A second case study will present in details the methodological approach that is used, and the last case study will focus on the because, well, now let's start with the presentation by Steph. Thank you so much, Anne-Sophie. Well, I'm going to present the cash transfer work in Togo. As part of the project called Community Development Projects, was a major project that was financed funded by World Bank and the Japanese fund, implemented by the Togolese government with support from UNICEF to improve access of households to some services, stimulating the demand for services through the National Social Protection Network. Many safety nets were in place, including I wanted to project tested, bring them out beneficiaries to the program. The complex form administrative during the project engaged with the various layers. So there was a role played by the community platforms. The idea of the program was to use community existing community platforms built at village levels, where to health workers, like 60 were trained by UNICEF, and it's very helpful for the screening and treatment of acute malnutrition, diarrhea, and acute respiratory diseases. The community workers were also collecting communications for behavior change in essential family practice like hand washing, hygiene, all these practices that we know of. The project, therefore, as the village where you had the health workers, we added another community health worker who was in charge of the child protection, who was trained for the needs, specific needs of the project for the proper question of intervention and organization of payments. And that one was in charge of behavior change activities through talks, child rights. So there was close collaboration between these two community platforms. The programs also target a specific area based on the nutritional status of these areas. 5 prefectures where malnutrition was high, or was higher in Togo. And nutrition 34% with the aim of increasing the impact. The nutritional impact, we targeted the 1,000-day window of opportunities. It was universal, effect of women, at least 3 months, and all children 0 to 24 months had access, and mothers that had children to 24 to 59 months suffering from acute malnutrition. So there's 1 catastrophe per month, except those twins. So in polygamous households, each woman will have catastrophe for their child. Overall, well, 11,500 women targeted with the aim of achieving 18,270 beneficiaries. Well, the objective is not to present the impact, the results, but the impact. We had an impact on the storm day. It's important to have this category targeting of the 1,000 days. How to determine the amount? There hasn't not been clear assessment per se. The amount was 5,000 CFA per mother, child, couple, monthly, distributed 2 years of the child in the village, directly in cash, so that mothers do not have to move to spare additional cost to collect the transfer. Elements taken into account, but there wasn't an assessment per se. That's based on the average expenditure of 4 households. Well, it was about 80,000 CFA per capita a year. In food feeding programs, the average monthly meals were 3,500. You see that the minimum salary is 28,000. Well, it's important to consider all these criteria. And customers represented 25 to 30% of the expenditures of the mother-child couple, which is significant. And finally, it was a program that was combining cash transfer plus toxin families by community health workers in charge of child protection, child rights, which was important, which were focused on heavier change. There was an assessment, but the program has built on this change to targeting better feeding, having more food, and hygiene and health also area was chosen because, as we said, services had to be available. Well, cash transfer was distributed directly to the women in RH conditionalities attached to with the aim of promoting those and this way to impact. Conditions were flexible, not mandatory, binding. Well, there was no suspension of the transfer if they were not complying. That included taking part in the talks, enrolling children, school, and recording births, training children under 15 years in households. They were not binding, but if those conditions were complied with, mother will get a bonus of 20,000 at the end of the program. But it's very complicated. So participation in talks were vitally maintained as criteria. These conditions participated to the programs and has fostered social cohesion around the program due to the perception that people had about the cash transfer. This was mainly raised during the discussions where they're saying, well, this is the money of the poor. This was the money of the donors to the poor people and had a good high impact the families. So the design phase is important to better communicate on the program, on the fact that the conditionals are flexible. Well, finally, they were not even enforced. The use of cash transfer was much control. It's meant for the feeding the children. There were not much computer-related activities, so these there's no sustain. This was not sustained. So we need to early anticipate the nefarious impacts or diversions of the programs that we are implementing. That is what we used as a method to better understand the impact, the impact pathway, and we have reconstructed this diagram and with all the steps we have to go through to achieve the nutritional improvement status of the child. So all the small green and red bars what we use to keep the diagram on the right hand side, which is complicated. Now let's focus on feeding and what to consider and what we achieved with field actors. Well, we have giving grant to the post office distributed households. These are security risks because they were moving around with a lot of cash. And we have the remoteness of the payment point from the households, women. We hospital were distributed to women, so women would have better income, but there were compensations because husbands were giving less money to women, or they were getting debt from the daily money transfer. So that increase in women's income was meant to buy food, but there is an adequate financial supply. The transfer not being regular. Well, it contributed to the improvement of the children's health, but which it was important to consider the hygiene factors in the households, all these factors that could contribute to the achievement of the objective, or the other way around, and anticipate on the reverse effects. This should be done at the beginning of the program. We did it in the middle of the program in order to refocus the implementation of the program so that it could achieve its results. Well, that is what I had to share with you at this stage of the program design in Togo. Thank you so much.
Before we move to the next presentation, I'd like to call on the speakers to speak a bit slowly to enable the interpreters to be able to keep up with your pace to facilitate understanding. By way of a reminder, let me recall to participants that you have the Q&A session where there is a space for that where you can ask your questions. We may provide answers on the spot during the workshop or later after the meeting. Let's now give the floor to the next speaker who will present the second case study presented by the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, prepared by the Niger Red Cross movement. Well, by way of a reminder, background information, this is actually a pilot project in the zone of Zender in an urban setting. It involves cash transfer involving different other activities, such as the strengthening of basic services in health facilities in order to improve quality of service, and also in order to contribute to communication for behavior change, which is tailored to the context. This cash transfer program targeted 140 villages in a period spanning from May to August 2022. So it would be interesting to point out that this approach, the methodology I'd like to present, focuses on decision aid tools that were prepared in the West Africa region. So this pilot intervention seeks to enable us to identify how to improve the provision of service. Now, by way of a reminder of the goals of this intervention, the main objective of this intervention, this cash transfer actually targeted economic empowerment of the vulnerable communities. So the expected outcomes targeted mainly children from 6 to 23 months old. We were seeking to reduce the number of victims of acute severe malnutrition. We were also seeking to diversify the diet of those categories of children, and also for the diet of households as well, but also with the goal of seeking to improve adaptation and coping strategies utilized in the sector of health and nutrition. And fourth expected outcome, we were targeting the use of health services, provision of health services for the children age ranging from 6 to 23 months. Now, as it has been said, let me try and give you some details of the main steps of the process, this analysis stage, in order to better prepare the response process. The first step of our intervention consists in taking stock of the existing data, sort of an evaluation of existing data. So then we looked at decision aid tools available in the intervention area. We also took the lists of indicators relating to severe and acute malnutrition to collect national scope and local level data on seasonal data. Now, with respect to the reliability of the data collected, we also conducted some analysis, trying to see how representative the data are and the sources utilized for the collection of the data. The second step consisted in organizing the intervention, in making it context specific, taking into account economic barriers and behavioral barriers. In this respect, we organized a multiple stakeholder workshop in order to depart from the causal scheme of malnutrition to try and unpack what are the underlying causes, underlying factors identified by UNICEF as part of the Cash for Nutrition manual. So based on the existing data and based on the knowledge of our field actors, we strive to update these list of actors. Once we updated the list of malnutrition factors. We then categorized the barriers depending on how important they are on malnutrition. We then identify the minor and major malnutrition factors. What is interesting in the Nigeria context is this workshop enabled us to unpack, to show some examples, to show the impacts on nutrition that were not identified in the literature review, in the secondary data research, especially among pregnant women, or others factors such as the use of traditional healers. So during the primary data collection, these layers were not discovered in the first place. After that, we looked at the geographical scoping of the beneficiaries. This step actually is project specific, depending on the targeted objectives of the projects. As part of our intervention, note that this is a short-term intervention that happens in the lean period. So this targeting is done in a three-step process. First, we identify health facilities, health areas, taking into account demographical data and mass data from the previous year, that is the lean period of year 2021, looking at admission rates and relapse, the rates of relapse, and the prevalence of malnutrition in the area. Once we have identified the health facilities, then we selected beneficiaries in those health facilities. That was done using registers available in these health facilities, depending on the origin, the areas of origin of the beneficiaries. Now, we also went on to perform the household selection, of course, taking into account the previous year lean period. Then the households were identified with the support of community relays and chiefs of neighborhoods, taking into account criteria of inclusion such as households having children aged from 6 to 23 months during the intervention period. And after that, we then went on with data collection to prepare socio-economic and behavioral analysis, tailored, bespoke, taking into account data available in the area. That was a three-step process. First, we started with interviews involving local authorities and health authorities. Then we organized focus groups with the targeted beneficiaries in order to have a better understanding of barriers and needs. And thirdly, we organized the survey on the households' economies and the scoping mechanisms in place and how this is sensitive to nutrition. We did that using data collection, trying to understand preferences, customs, and scoping strategies relating to health and nutrition. And in the data collection process, we also took into account, we prepared some questions to better understand the barriers identified in the previous step, especially the use of traditional healers and dietary taboos in the community, to see whether these practices are still in place. Fifth step, we conducted an analysis of market functionalities, focusing on nutritious foodstuffs. We then looked at the list of nutritious foodstuffs as prepared by Save the Children as part of the survey conducted in the Zandaya region. We updated it with taking into account local crops. We had interviews with the local state tradesman with such fish, infant flour available in the community with the support of the project of Nutlet. Then we also conducted some observation in the market to see how these markets operate. Then we organized price-related information collection, storage capacities, to make sure that markets are able to fulfill demand in the community. And also we looked at price volatility to try and understand how pricing is important. The sixth step, we organized an interview, a discussion with beneficiaries, trying to look into the modalities such as security aspects, gender aspects. They then organized separate focus groups, men and women in separate focus groups, in order to be able to discuss the distribution mechanisms, the frequency of transfers, and trying to understand who are the direct receivers in households, and also what are the risks, and also how to come up with the mitigating measures. Next step, we conducted a work on the cost of the affordability of nutritious foodstuffs to try and adjust cash transfer, the amount of cash transfer. We then resorted to Save the Children dietary paper prepared in the rural area of Zinder in 2020. In 2020, the cost of nutritious food per child and per month, that was assessed up to 6,000 CFA back in 2020. On this amount, we applied a coefficient to try and reflect the increase, taking into account price increase in market price increases. Then we had a 30% increase rate. So we then had an adjusted price of 7,800 of the cost of nutritious food per child and per month in that specific context of our intervention. Next slide, please. Then after that, once we conducted this assessment on the cost of a nutritious food, we also integrated this amount in the amount allocated to the nutritious food, costs relating to water, sanitation, and health-related costs. All these were already set in the minimum expenditure basket at the national level. That enabled us to assess a monthly cost per household, where we deducted the current household's current ability to cover their needs in the light of information gathered as part of initial data mining. We then adjusted that amount to taking into account the size of the household, which is very important in our intervention area, of course, based on the minimum expenditure basket. Once we assessed the amount of transfer, the 8th step consisted in analyzing all the sets of data collected along the process in order to choose what are the best response options, to try and understand the frequencies of the beneficiaries and choose the modalities taking into account the barriers identified. We also took into account the risks attached to each and every modality, each and every distribution modality. We also took into account market operationality, market function, and we also took into account the whole array of modalities. We did a cross-fertilization, cross-analysis to come up with a combined view of it. We then conducted the focus group with the beneficiaries, enabled us to understand how to improve nutrition for young children, taking into account all these varieties of modalities. For example, infant flour was preferred by the different participants in the focus group because this has a significant positive impact on the work chains, the value chains of women's activities. So part of the amount was written on the voucher, and part was dedicated to additional needs of the household. So these are the 8 steps we went through as part of our methodology. It covers all the major steps that we went into as part of our analysis. I'd like to place an emphasis on communication for social and behavioral change. As part of initial data collection, we were able to identify the food diversification for children aged between 6 and 23 is very, very low. Poor diversification, dietary diversification before the start of the lean period. And similarly, we also identify the household's knowledge in terms of care provision and infant nutrition and food provision was very, very, very basic. this actually highlighted the need for us to adopt a communication approach which is tailored to the realities we found out. So therefore, there was a specific communication, bespoke communication strategy that took into account the realities of the ground. That involved chiefs of households, health facilities, and community members in order to be more transparent, in order to be able to take actions informed by observations on the ground. We also had a specific component on infant nutrition that was supported by in-house visits to the different households, and that facilitated by household participation in discussion groups. We looked at 3 areas, such as the use of preventive and curative services and practice of good food practices and environmental contexts. We targeted short-term results, taking into account the duration of our intervention. We had short-term results. So the timeline of the different stages, the process started in January with the first part involving secondary data mining, then followed the whole array of analysis conducted between February and March in order to be able to organize the first transfers, supported by first communication activities that started in May, in order to make sure that it tallies with the lean period in the community. I thank you very much indeed for your attention. Well, these are the key highlights of our methodology. We intend to continue with the last case study, and I hope that we'll have time to dig into this later. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to just make a comment on this slide to show the approach we utilized at the World Food Program. The modeling that I will show in a short while will be related to market analysis to assess the cost of nutritious food, the cost of dietary stuffs. By way of background, this approach actually fits into, is part and parcel of a project on food crisis in the Sahel. It is a EU-funded project which main goal is to fight against malnutrition and food insecurity, to transform nutrition systems. In this slide, you can see all the different components of the food system. The approach I'd like to describe here focuses on the market component of this whole value chain, supporting the prevention of malnutrition, which is a key component of the project, through the definition of the amounts of transfer, cash transfer. So we started by a context analysis based on the definition of key activities and the process to follow and the timing of these approaches, and also innovations to be provided in the approach we had implemented. These are highlighted in yellow here. First and foremost, we have an approach describing retailers and marketplaces. After that, we have discussions with experts in our institution and CBT experts. We then assessed the value of cash transfer for nutrition. Then, as you can see in orange, we then conducted this analysis depending on our goals, and then we performed some adjustments along the way. Now, the seasonality of this approach is mainly season-centered. It is seasonal in nature because, as you know, in our sector, seasonality is of paramount importance as it influences nutrition and malnutrition. So the seasonal calendar that was utilized reflects, as you can see, the different key highlights of post-harvest insecurity factors that were used to analyze and inform our decision. Well, prior to the process, we prepared a list of foodstuffs, because as you know, the national food systems don't perform a full monitoring of foodstuffs and food and crops. Then we prepared a list of food crops based on the study conducted in the 3 countries of intervention. Next slide, please. Conducted by FNG. The prerequisite for the analysis, we conducted an analysis of national food pricing systems in order to see how we can be able to assess and fix prices. Then we did analysis and adaptation based on data provided by FNG assessment. And also we conducted that assessment to try and find out food availability and food preferences, dietary preferences in these intervention zones. Then after that, we integrated this monitoring system into a national monitoring system. So as you see, the lists of adaptation processes were discussed and mainstreamed in the national systems, because as I said, the lists that are prepared were shortened lists, the list of food crops in the different countries, depending on FNG analysis and adaptation utilizing computer programs as well. Now, why 20 foodstuffs? Because we realized that at least around 60 foodstuffs are most consumed in the communities. So we had discussions, extensive discussions, and agreed on the 20 crops that are likely to be followed, and we can allow us to conduct a monthly assessment. These covers all the different foodstuff categories as it is utilized in the dietary cost. For each country, the lists were prepared in collaboration with the teams and WFP teams, but also the national system actors who took part in the preparation of the lists. As I said at the opening of this presentation, our approach is closely related to markets. It's a market-centered approach. That is, we monitor market prices utilizing national systems in place. And in countries, in cooperation with the national systems, we also work with in cooperation with regional bodies of WFP. So we conduct analysis and processing of data collected at the national level. Once such data are processed, they are then analyzed through the lens of cost of diet to determine the cost of a nutritious, more affordable nutritious food crop that fulfills the nutritional needs. That cost will be the baseline for the setting of the price of our of foodstuffs as part of our intervention. Next slide, please. So as I said, once the cost is set, where there are 2 steps remaining. That is, we'll look at what are the combination that best reflects the nutritional reality, dietary needs of the community, of the groups. Then we use the same modeling to try and optimize. This modeling is done using an internal WFP tool, enabling us to take into account all the different cost factors, covering direct and indirect cost elements, and even taking into account the percentages attached to transfers performed in the national system. And lastly, as a result, after this modeling, we'll have a combination of foodstuffs. For example, we can clearly determine what are the types of food crops available that cover the nutritional needs, and also which are adjusted, taking into account the different cost elements, which are internal, and also we adjusted to the basket, the cost of basket, to determine the amount of transfer towards our target communities. Next slide. Next slide, please. So we were considering an optimal modeling internally. This is an illustration of the tool that we use internally. On your left-hand side of the screen, you can see a list of foodstuffs, an example of food crops that are models. And on the right-hand side, you see the analysis conducted and the results to determine the nutritional value and the dietary diversification, which is required for the target communities. So most of the nutrients are properly and well distributed across the different categories of crops. So the nutritional needs are covered. We have around 5 food stuff groups that are considered at least. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So through everything that has been said, I'd like to show you some application of this model. Through QLSS project, we targeted pregnant and lactating mothers and children from 6 to 23 months old who receive the value of this nutrition basket in order to prevent malnutrition. Next slide, please. First and foremost, I'd like to show you an application on local foodstuffs as determined. And as I said a while ago, our approach is market-centered. This is the case of pregnant and lactating mothers. As I said, everything is seasonal. There are 3 possible scenarios. Through these scenarios, we can then determine the estimated amount for the nutrition basket. And from season 2 to season 4, you can see a sharp variation depending on food crop availability and market prices. We can clearly see that season 4, which is the period of crop availability, that is the harvesting season, we can see that the cost of the rate of cash transfer is very low compared to other periods of this timeline. Next slide. Well, thank you very much. Well, I think there are some slides that have not appeared. Thank you very much, Sayudu, for giving us this presentation. Let's spare some part of it, earmark some of the discussions, some of the points for the Q&A session, because there's the Q&A session after this webinar. We'll send you a form to ask you to answer, to provide detailed answers following these presentations. Let's capture one or two questions before we move on to the discussion panel. We want to make sure that we provide answer to all the questions, but also note that, be advised that we will send you all the materials, the presentation materials, along with the questions and their answers. There's one question on relating to upcoming webinars focusing on nutritional results, especially when we send you this recap, the recap of this workshop. We'll also conduct a poll, an opinion poll, to try and understand what are your areas of interest to better prepare the upcoming workshops, especially relating to cash transfer for nutrition. So we'll ask you questions, we'll probe you to try and understand whether you're interested in participating in other workshops to look into the outcomes section of this process, or whether you're interested in monitoring and evaluations chapter of this process. Or we may also want to look into the use of cash transfer for treatment and prevention. Once we hope that opinion poll will enable us to collect all these sets of information for the next steps to come. Now, one question on the presentation: the unexpected outcomes of the analysis you presented in the case study. We can see it seems that some of the outcomes are cross-cutting. So what are some of the recommendations you have if somebody is to prepare such a similar program? What are the unexpected outcomes, and what are things that can be done differently and better?
I believe that the fact there were some conditionalities that were enforced strictly, whereas at the beginning they were not supposed to be enforced, being a pressure on the women. So in the future, we need to better communicate on the flexibility of the conditionalities and ensure that they are implemented that way, because we realized at the community level, the actors wanted the program to work, and they were telling us, well, for it to work, well, women need to be, threatened a little bit. They need some pressure. So we need to explain the logic of the program to the various actors and not discourage. Maybe we can have less direct pathways, impact pathways. There are women where we will not necessarily buy in the pressure. Well, some are buying some codes to keep them and sustain the gains of the program and not to relapse after the program exits. So why not encourage savings? These may be indirect ways to improve children nutrition, but we can couple both, not trying to be so strict in the monitoring of expenditures and the use of cash transfer by women. Otherwise, this will become very strict conditionalities. I believe if there were more IGAs, could have maybe encouraged better women rather than seeing some who decide to get pregnant in order to be recruited for future programs. Okay, a lot of questions. When I said, as I said, we can't answer all of them directly. We'll answer some online now, but others will be answered later, sent to you by mail. So it's not to be behind schedule. So let's continue the next steps of the product discussion. Well, here we're lucky to have amongst us experts on the issues of nutrition and health. We have Maggie, who introduced herself at the very beginning, and nutrition advisor for USAID, an active member of a global Cash for Nutrition Outcome Group. We have Saidu from the regional office of WFP, as knowledge on CashNet. First question is to Saidu. Said, according to you, what are the gaps identified under the minimum MAB, minimum expenditure basket, compared to the cost of nutritive food of countries in the sub-region, like differences and similarities between MEBs and cost of diet? And second, can you tell us what, according to you, ongoing progress in the countries or in West Africa to include nutritive cost of diet in the minimum basket? Thank you, Diane. So please, can you go slowly for the interpreters to follow? Okay, thank you. Well, I want to take us back to what the MEB means and what cost of diet means in this context for the MEB. First, it's the cost what a household needs to meet their basic needs. Actually, what I define it in a simple way. It includes a lot of aspects. For the cost of diet, remind that this is the lowest cost of a food regime that meets all the needs in nutrients. Well, the difference in the definition, we can see that MEB builds on the essential needs that can be food and non-food needs, whereas on the other side, we're talking about the nutritional needs for households. See the difference there. The gaps. If I consider MEB, we know that the MEB approach is exclusively based on the food, the basic needs expenditures in the house, whereas cost is kind of optimizing based on the cost of food items on the market, and which are defined as a minimum of diet that can meet the nutritional needs of the household. Well, none of the approach gives a direct cost, but it's after assessments and adjustments that we come up with the amounts to find the required amount. To talk about similarities on both, may say that both approaches are all aiming at establishing a monetary value to define a food basket, while keeping in mind that the MAB includes food and non-food items. We also know that, as I mentioned, most food groups to define both baskets are more or less between 8 and 9 food groups, so they're almost the same in terms of gaps. So to speak, for us, the MAB approach is based on the expenditure, only focusing on the household, on what the households consume, but not necessarily on optimal nutrition. But when you consider cost of diet software, we clearly see that we were able to estimate the minimum cost of a basket, which is meeting the nutrition need of members of a household. We can also note that there is a gap in the MAB. But in the cost of diet, there is a question I even saw in the chat. That. So this might be an answer to that question. The cost of the food diet is estimated through the cost of diet takes into consideration food diet, having 3 types, calculating 3 types or 3 baskets of monitored. So we consider the energetic input, estimate therefore the cost thereof, and we know more or less the cost of a nutritious basket, including quantity and quality. And answer the question, basic food items are adjusted, and items that represent taboos are excluded. They are taken into account on the other analysis in order to make the analysis of drivers influencing the cost. Developments underway in the country, so in the countries where we conducted cost of diet analysis or studies, the studies are based on analysis of secondary review, combining the secondary review and a quantitative analysis, which is the cost of diet. Through these analyses, in a country where we have MEB, through the surveys, we also make a combination to harmonize in order to have a nutritious enough basket, not only depending on what people are regularly consuming, but which takes into consideration the nutritional needs of a household. Currently in Burkina Faso and Mali, in Niger, all countries that conducted FNG reviews are able to make a combination and have an improved, come up with a harmonized or improved basket, taking into consideration the various gaps that are not covered in the other baskets. Thank you so much, Saidu, for this information, for highlighting the differences in the objectives and the design of the MEP and the cost of a nutritious diet. Marina, when presenting the findings of the Nigeria workshop, may shed more light on this. But as we saw, there are a lot of exchanges going on. My next question is to Maggie. Slide, please. Maggie. Are you aware of additional tools that can be used to make decisions on cash transfer in the emergency situation to meet the nutrition needs? Well, you may share the experience of Nigeria, and according to you, what could be recommendations on the integration of the SPCC component in the cash for nutrition results approach?
Thank you, Dan.
I believe this is necessary.
So, yes, thank you so much. So I think I'll talk a little bit about our experience in Nigeria first. I think what we saw, we recently, I believe Marina will talk about this more, worked with the Nutrition in Emergencies Working Group to try to establish reasonable transfer values for a variety of use cases for cash and vouchers for nutrition, one of which was the improvement of diet adequacy for pregnant and lactating women and for small children. And I think that for me, the most important thing, especially in my role as a donor that's very committed to the harmonization and coordination process for the emergency space, is that any process that's used to determine the transfer value needs to be transparent and it needs to be replicable. So for us, we in the example for Nigeria, we actually used very basic tools to do our basket calculation. We used the NutVal software and Excel. The reason that we chose to do that is because those tools are free and readily available to the stakeholders that are involved in the conversation. And this would enable them to go in themselves and recalculate as necessary a basket. So for example, in the Nigeria context, they may change the contents of the illustrative basket for the MEB in the coming years. If that happens, that will have an effect on what the nutrition needs are for those targeted special groups. And they'll need to recalculate the transfer values and the basket contents against nutrients for those groups. So using free, available software that's like publicly available is a real help to the stakeholder conversation so that everyone feels included. And so the process can be replicated. In Nigeria, where we were very fortunate to have had a recent F&G process done that included, of course, a cost of the diet exercise. So we built upon that. The primary use of that data was to give us a solid list of sentinel foods for the Northeast specifically, because we had this very extensive market data as well as prices. But again, that process, because it's very intense, isn't replicable every time you want to reconsider the transfer value of your basket. So I think using something free and publicly available is really important to make sure that the conversation is transparent. On the question about social and behavior change communication and conditionality, for me, I think as I've been following this, acknowledging that this is cash for nutrition is a very new conversation globally, what we have seen so far is that educational component is really essential to the program having the targeted effect. So for me, the question isn't whether or not it's necessary, it's how do you build and design your program in a way that makes it easy for those essential actions to be delivered in a way that doesn't penalize the participants. So for example, I would say you have to think about the platform within which you are delivering the CVA assistance. If you compare just a regular general food assistance platform that may already be cash-based, now a benefit of doing cash or vouchers in that type of programming for food assistance is that it's not as intensive in terms of the amount of time you have to spend with the community because you're not doing a direct distribution every month. Now, if you're using that and on top of that, you're layering your CVA for nutrition transfer, it makes it more difficult to reach your beneficiaries to deliver the messages that you want to deliver. On the other hand, if you use a care group type model where you have, caregivers coming together at regular intervals for some type of, coaching, messaging, caregiving coaching, education about complementary feeding and breastfeeding, those kinds of things. Now that's a great platform to use and then layer the CVA transfers on top of, because then you have a regular educational opportunity to reinforce the purpose of the program and also allow for the social sort of cohesion and the sharing across the group about how people are creatively using their transfers. Because part of the value of cash and vouchers is that you want to give people freedom and autonomy to use the money in the way that is helpful for them based on their own choice, but also you want to guide that decision-making process a bit with good education. And so for me, I think that the SBCC part of it, specifically the social behavior change, it has to be layered in somehow. And I would encourage you all, as you're thinking about doing these kinds of programming, to do it in a way where it's almost invisible, like it's just built into the natural structure of the program. So it doesn't feel like a job that the beneficiary has to do to attend that, to check the box in order to get their benefit. And I would say as well that I think soft conditionality is important. You don't want to, opt someone out because they don't show up 1 week for their care group or whatever the model is. I think that you have to really plan ahead of time when you're designing your program to create as many touch points as possible to deliver those messages. Otherwise, the chances of diversion or inappropriate use that aren't going to help your program reach its nutrition goals are high. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My take from what you've said is that it's important to build on what is existing and to think of feasibility for the implementing actors, but also feasibility for the users, either for tools, trying to find tools that are free, to publicly free, and not to discourage those who can't afford the paying one. Avoid to build on something that's too heavy to put in place. Think of some of those who will be implementing. Also think of those who will be using. Shouldn't be an extra workload. Someone should not be driven out because they are not participated. And the use of care groups, which is an existing platform, which is not that heavy, but which enables people not only to get some, which enable people to discuss, to share, to exchange, but also to get advice on how to use this. Thank you so much for these feedbacks. We are pursuing on the issue of cash transfer and the experience of the floor to the speaker, thanks to the two panelists. Thank you so much, Diane. Thanks to all. I'm Marina Tripaldi, as I introduced earlier on, technical advisor for cash transfer and vouchers for Save the Children. But I'm also co-chair of a global group working on issues of cash transfer for nutrition. And in fact, in this role, sharing a presentation where my presentation with Jan. It's a pleasure to share which are the fruits of this collaboration between the global groups, and which is a group that is hosted by the Global Nutrition Cluster. It's a group that emerged from the initiative of the the cluster on recommended in order to facilitate collaborations and coordination between the various actors. Having said that, this year, I believe that was around May, the Nigeria cluster felt the need of organizing coordination and use those mechanisms that were existing under the global nutrition cluster. This requires support from the technical experts that had a transfer of nutrition knowledge. Therefore, presenting, well, just introduced in English. The Nigeria cluster has taken the initiative to harmonize everything related to cash transfer in nutrition, where various actors had different expertise and knowledge. I'm handing over the floor to Hamet to take you through about the initiative. Hamet.
Thank you, Marina. This was a 3 days workshop conducted by the nutrition sector in northeastern Nigeria in collaboration with the Global Nutrition Cluster and the USAID, as well as also with the support of National Cash Working Group, Federal Ministry of Health, UNICEF, WFP, and Save the Children. So the initial discussions for this workshop started around beginning of the year, and the actual planning commenced around August, September, through initiations from USAID, Maggie, who is here with us, as well as also Global Nutrition Cluster represented by Marina, and the Northeastern Nigeria Nutrition Cluster and National Working Group. So use of CVA as a modality to improve maternal and child nutrition has been significantly growing, especially in the humanitarian response in northeastern Nigeria. However, the lack of context-specific operational guideline on how to use CVA in the emergency nutrition programming has created multiple operational challenges. These challenges included solid CVA for nutrition use cases, lack of harmonized approach, especially in terms of targeting for CVA for nutrition, modality of transfers, conditionality, transfer value, frequency of transfer, as well as the duration of the transfers for different maternal and child nutrition interventions. There was also a challenge in terms of capacity strength needs, and there was capacity gaps, and a challenge in reporting. Despite CVA for nutrition was included in the 2022 Northeastern Nigeria humanitarian response, which targeted around 37,000 beneficiaries, this was not properly reported by the partners that were implementing the CVA for nutrition in the northeastern Nigeria. So the main purpose of this 3 days workshop that was conducted between 18th to 20th October was to develop an operational guideline for the implementers of CVA for nutrition in the context of Northeast, but as well as also to the whole Nigeria. Next slide. So the first day of the workshop was dedicated more on at understanding the context and sharing learning from the ongoing CVA for nutrition activities in the northeastern Nigeria from the existing partners. So first, we opened it with a workshop with the state of the evidence of CVA for nutrition and explained what are the main approaches when CVA is used for nutrition outcomes. Then there was also presentation on partner presence on CVA for nutrition, which was a mapping survey done in the 3 crisis-affected northeastern states of Nigeria, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe. And the mapping of operational presence of CVA in general. So the mapping for CVA for nutrition showed like most of partners are using e-voucher as a common modality for nutritional adequacy purpose. We also discussed it in the first day, the cost of nutrition diets and affordability for the affected households to ensure access to an adequate nutrition. So WFP presented the field nutrient gap model, and this has shown how to reduce the cost of nutrition diet with the complementary interventions. Finally, we also had some learnings from the experience of NGOs, especially Mess Corps, who presented using CVA for nutrition to access fresh foods, and ACF, who presented porridge mom intervention, as well as also Save the Children. And also they presented on how to target, how they are doing their targeting, complementary nutrition services, as well as also available evidences and learning is from so far. I stop here and hand over to Marina for continuing the next slides of the presentation.
Great. Continuing, on the second day, we have seen the results of the presentation, looked at the results of the presentation on the first day to see what are the costs of the food items that are most consumed by households in this specific area. It clearly appeared that the costs now food, nutritious food basket, well, we saw from the experience of WFP, we've learned that the amounts that were used align to those costs of a nutritious basket that already something we used. A tool can easily be adapted and user-friendly on how to build a basket that's not so use of food security. We have introduced new elements, fresh elements that contribute, that secure the nutritional inputs for women and children. So that's the tool helps us for the modeling. We did it for the various periods of the year. We have looked at various periods and used the list of food items that were most consumed in these regions using group discussions and key informants and experience from WFP. And also you looking at the practice and experience of the stakeholders working in the region who know the food, the dietary habits of people. We have looked at the list of prices of those food items and proposed various baskets and calculated the average between a basket that corresponds to the lean season and one that corresponds to the harvest of season. And next slide. Now we have used on the third day, we used the third day to actually prepare the operational guide. We used 4 groups. worked on the various key parameters in the development of project operations, programs, objectives of project targeting. But we also use all the learning lessons learned through the first day to design these elements that were to be used in the kit for approaches, for different types of uses of cash transfer and voucher for nutrition. Next slide. And in this context, the northeast of Nigeria, cash CVAs were used for these 4 key objectives. First is improve the nutritional inputs and food assistance, but also using cash transfer to prevent relapses by targeting the malnourished children after they have been discharged by healthcare services to avoid their relapsing. Second objective is actually the use of cash vouchers and transfer to encourage the use of prevention services and healthcare, antenatal care, and postnatal care, like breastfeeding substitutes, exceptional case, what should be done, how we can use cash transfers to provide these women who had no other choice or who shouldn't no other choice than feeding with the substitute. How can we use cash transfer for that? With regard to the treatment, we have looked at how cash transfers and vouchers could be used to facilitate access to the treatment of moderate malnutrition. Thirdly, for those who are using Tom Brown, how to use cash transfer vouchers rather than making the conversion with enriched flour, families, and in-kind contribution to prepare these flours. How can we give that to the household so they can have access to these items themselves, produce the flour? And fourth typology is using cash transfer facilitate access to treatment of acute malnutrition. How can we cover all those costs related to there? In that case, we have looked to discuss with the government and looked at the data which show that poorest families, needs of the poorest families in this area. That's how it concluded. Now we have a timeline to complete that professional study, and as you can see, we actually want the Nigeria cluster nutrition to take leadership in finalizing all that it has been created in close collaboration with the cash working group, and we're expecting things to be finalized by the end of the year. Thank you so much. Floor back to you. Thank you so much. Going to close the webinar today without much delay. Thanks to all participants. Well, we will be sending to you by emails all the presentations that have been made today with a summary of the answers to all the questions received in the Q&A section. But as we said, we'll also send you a link for a quick survey. Measure the level of satisfaction of a webinar, and mainly to identify other thematic areas for upcoming webinars, or other focus areas. It can be monitoring evaluation, or the findings or the results of some interventions, or scale out, take into account treatment aspect. Thank you. Thanks to all the presenters for the work. We'll hope to meet very soon for other webinars. Thank you so much.